So I want to give, I'll give the panelists a chance now to speak and to present themselves and to talk a little bit about what they do in their current roles. And then the plan is to talk about, decentralized finance, decentralized operations, dApps, protocols, how those exist in today's world and how those compare to the more centralized product offerings that we see in the markets, and the pros and cons basically of one against the other.
So I'm Norrie, I'm the CEO and founder of Astralis. We're a local Gibraltar firm in the process of obtaining our DLT license. We're focusing on basically like crypto investment style apps and combining sort of different parts of DeFi with CeFi to make financial products more accessible.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Stephen Borg. I work at Gnosis as VP of Finance. For those that have never heard of Gnosis, we built mainly on Ethereum, and we built a number of well-known dApps. Main ones are probably the Gnosis Safe, which is a multi-sig, and more recently a DEX aggregator known as Gnosis Protocol. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Thomas Johnson. I'm Chief Operations Officer of Digital Asset Management, which is one of the DLT firms here in Gibraltar. We specialize in OTC trades, some cross-border payments as well, but we're focusing now on market making, arbitrage trading, yield farming and other projects.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex Davis. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Tezos Israel, and I founded a DeFi ecosystem based on Tezos. It's a, can't really call it a protocol, as it's actually with Tezos' ethos of evolving, has those mechanisms essentially built in. And yeah, that keeps me up at night every day, so that's enough.
Before I start, I'd like to explain our seating plan. So there's CeFi, DeFi, CeFi, DeFi, CeFi. So we've done it, strategically placed. So my name's Patricia Risso. I'm the Global Head of Compliance for Bitso. If you don't know Bitso, Bitso is a crypto spot exchange. We're doing a lot of exciting stuff, and hopefully I'll be able to explain a few things that Bitso is doing in LATAM and hopefully globally. So yeah, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. So I want to start. Obviously, Gibraltar has become one of the jurisdictions of choice for crypto-related businesses that want to operate within a regulated environment, right? So the first question is more for the regulated guys on the panel, and it's why Gibraltar? Why is Gibraltar an attractive jurisdiction for you guys? And obviously, I'll start with Adam.
Yeah, sure, no worries at all. So I think like the main reason for Gibraltar as a jurisdiction for a lot of cryptocurrency firms, obviously the regulatory environment is very, very friendly. I think it was, definitely one of the first in the world to make a regulatory environment that isn't just an absolute nightmare to operate within. A lot of that certainty gives, I guess, a little bit more of like a stable foundation for you to build products on. But I think obviously we're in an industry which is constantly evolving day to day. I think for most firms it's a big challenge to sort of navigate that scope. I think being the fact that Gibraltar has got a very progressive regulator, and I think the accessibility to a lot of the services which exist within Gibraltar, kind of like yourself, Anthony, gives a lot of firms, I guess, the ability to grow and innovate in an environment which isn't sort of trying to stifle them. I know for me, picking Gibraltar as the destination to get regulated and operate from, having the wide range of high quality services which are supporting those regulators kind of allows us to have like the certainty to operate. At the end of the day, I think these firms take a long time to build. I think we have to sort of make sure that the regulation which we are, we go for as an industry is one that wants to actually help foster growth. I think, it's quite easy for regulators to put a lot of red tape and bureaucracy to sort of stifle innovation, especially for startups. If you're not like a huge multinational company, I think Gibraltar's a very, very good place for you to start and grow. People are very, very friendly. I think the industry here is very, very good. And I think that regulatory environment we operate in here gives that certainty for us to sort of invest in and grow our products outwards.
Thanks. Moving more to Tom and Patricia now. obviously you, Adam, and your company, your business is in the process of well, it's a startup, much similar to DAM, and going through the process now of becoming regulated. So what, for you guys who have already been regulated for a while and been in the space in Gibraltar and been dealing with a regulator for a period of time now, how have you guys found it? And you know, first and foremost, do you agree with sort of the analysis that Adam has given there on the rationale as to why Gibraltar is beneficial? And secondly, do you think how has that been in practice on a day-to-day basis when dealing with the regulator?
Yeah, well, I think Adam did a great job there on explaining the jurisdiction and how innovative it's been. Dealing with the regulators has been great. We applied for our license at the very beginning. It was a learning curve for the regulators and ourselves, but they were very engaging. They were very open to new ideas, and just being explained how things work. I think that was a big one, the lack of education, and bringing in private industry experts, explaining how the industry works was great. Yeah.
How are you finding it, Patricia, with dealing with the regulator?
It's been a journey for sure, and it's no big secret that Bitso was already it wasn't a startup by any strange. It wasn't a startup like, for example, DAM and Astralis, and we had. We came from an unregulated space, but with a specific vision, and and our founders were very focused on making sure that we entered into the regulatory space. They undertook a jurisdictional analysis, which is really, really important why Gibraltar stuck out. And I'm going to explain that to you, Anthony, and the rest of the community. It was important to have a regulator that understood what the space required, which was that kind of understanding, the space and the time to evolve in a regulatory environment. That was critical for the success of any VASP coming to Gibraltar. And I think that we had that understanding from the regulators. And to be fair, at the time there was a very robust team in the FSC which understood what we were trying to achieve as a business. And one of the benefits of being regulated, because everybody looks from afar, especially from a decentralized space, and I'm not putting it down, and I'll get into that later on, but Gibraltar was key in the sense that it didn't have an AMLT. Of course it has an AML framework, CFT framework, but it was beyond that. It was the 9 principles that encompass the whole of the spectrum of a business, of a financial services business, from your customer care policies and requirements to your financial resource and non-financial resource, which is the insurance piece. And how Bitso through this journey has benefited is immense. I remember celebrating here with Pablo, one of our founders that sits in the audience, when we first had 1 million customers. We're 3 million. And what does that mean? We're a regulated entity. There are many exchanges out there that are not regulated. And what that brought to the table was our ability to give us that credibility, not only for our users to trust us with their assets, but to be able to speak to key strategic partners, banks, on and off ramps. It's important to speaking to insurance company that have insured our hot wallet. We couldn't have had those conversations without us being able to demonstrate that we were adhering to these requirements. And I see that this regulation has been a business enabler, which is key in this industry. And I can see why other DLT firms are attracted to Gibraltar, because it's not only about the regulation. The government of Gibraltar is very supportive, but also the infrastructure, the banks in Gibraltar that understand what the requirements are, the accounting firms that have been brilliant in terms of understanding how to account for crypto, also the law firms in Gibraltar, and our legal advisors. I've got Joey, so that's like pretty good. Sorry, Anthony. It's been, one of these things that it is an all-encompassing jurisdiction. We have the sun and the sea and a great nightlife, which somebody was asking, what's the quality of life? Brilliant. So, in Bitso, our journey has been assisted by regulation. It's been an enabler, and that's my key message to the community. Don't shy away from regulation because you're trying to stop the inevitable. This is here to stay. This enables, and it creates a safe environment for our users because everybody's playing by the same principles, not rules. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks. I'm going to go now to the DeFi guys, because I'm sure Alex has a lot to say about that. What do you think? So obviously, DeFi now has become one of the buzzwords in the industry. It's been bandied about a lot, and there's all this talk about, well, is it truly decentralized? Is the protocol truly decentralized? Is there really an organization behind it? And when you lift that hood, what are we dealing with exactly? So, Alex, over to you. Well, I haven't really asked a question, so let me just formulate that in the way of a question. So why do you think DeFi is so important versus these centralized bodies that exist today?
I mean, do you want the controversial answer as the DeFi guy? Or
Whatever you think.
Everyone else is looking for a complete license that they can get under. Why is DeFi so important? Okay. Essentially, all of regulation and the way that we see it, that most of the regulation that we're here talking about in terms of a centralized exchange or a fund, example, you guys are essentially investing into DeFi protocols tokens, but they're not DeFi in and of itself. You're just enabling, no offense, but you're just enabling access to these protocols that are decentralized. And so that is something that you can actually, grasp your hands on and regulate. In the discussions about moving to Gibraltar, because we're launching essentially a decentralized finance protocol, and once we launch, there's no controlling that, and that's something that regulators find typically very hard to understand. I was successful in explaining it to my Jewish mother, so how did I start something that I don't control or own is complicated in and of itself. But you said something about how it's only 9 principles. 9 rules that you need to follow in order to fall within the scope of jurisdiction and into being regulated. And I said this morning in a conversation with Anthony and someone else that, the 10 Commandments is only 10 Commandments, but look how much trouble that's given the world. So why DeFi is so important is because all of this regulation that has come down, and it most likely came from good purposes. As we know the Howey test and what happened with the history of selling stock certificates for oranges and fleecing investors. DeFi, these regulatory burdens have now created it to a point where retail investors typically, most of the world cannot access financial services. Even in the United States, I think 12 to 20% of the people don't have a bank account, either because they don't have enough money or because it's too far for them. And so DeFi allows you to actually actively invest $10 at a time, $100 at a time, $100,000 at a time. The point being is that we can actually give access to financial opportunities that these regulations have actually kept retail investors out of, the majority of people out of. And so especially with the inflating dollar, inflating currencies, DeFi is tremendously important.
Can I add to that? Because I think I'm going to pick on a few points that you've just said there because they're critical. And I do believe, in a DeFi environment, and it's sending, earning, and it's democratizing banking and facilitating. This is something that I generally do believe in making it available to all. But equally, for the sake of being controversial here, I think that there are fundamentals that need to be adhered to in DeFi. For example, safeguarding user assets. For example, making sure that the protocols, services, products are adhered to. They all have risks, very similar risks, security risks. We were talking about the Poly network before and stuff like that. So you need to make, developers and innovators need to make certain, we were talking about this like a pillar, a commitment to ensuring that you have basic fundamentals in that project. So this is something that I generally believe in, and I was mentioning to Adam outside because we were just having this amazing conversation, and I just want to share it with you because I thought that was very, very good, and how it's, it's making sure that you can do this smartly. That regulation at the moment is not clear for DeFi, but there are certain possibilities because it's all done by design, not by technical limitations, whether you can adhere to mitigate security risk, safeguarding customer assets, financial and liquidity risks. So realistically, it starts at the beginning of the project and laying those foundations.
Why then, I don't see why you need to be centralized in order to give users the safety and security that one would need. Typically, banks withhold people's money, making it so secure that they can't access it. So why do you need centralization or custody of funds in order to protect a user? It kind of assumes that the user's
But
inept.
I think the point I was trying to make, maybe I didn't make it very clearly, and I think you're talking about the custody element. I'm not saying that. I'm saying about creating innovative solutions to safeguard those assets through maybe specific, security, vulnerability testing and stuff like that, making sure that your protocol is pretty tight and safeguards those interactions through the smart contracts as well. So it's not necessarily, what I'm trying to say is that the traditional regulatory requirements are hard to follow, and it's up to the community to guide regulators and policymakers and how it could fit, not stifle innovation, because he said not stifling, and fostering innovation, but creating those ideas and that policy making which enhances and doesn't constrain the DeFi space. This is what I'm sorry if I made the point of thinking, no, not the custody, just because I'm a centralized exchange. Not at all, because that is...
Thanks, Patricia. I want to give Stephen a chance to butt in there and share his thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not going to maybe answer your question because I think I agree with Alex in everything that I said. It's this is why we sat like this also. But maybe more address what Patricia was saying. And I think we can all agree in this room where it would be beneficial for all of us to build a regulatory framework for DeFi that achieves its objectives. But what we are all realizing over time is that maybe it's not possible. And the reason why it's not possible is because maybe it's not meant to be regulated. The reason why crypto and DeFi was created is, to remove intermediaries, which is typically the person that the regulator is going to want to regulate. And what I worry about sometimes in building this regulatory framework is that we're going to force ourselves to, or we're going to be applying a traditional regulatory framework that just doesn't work for DeFi. The output, the result of that being stifling innovation and almost stopping what crypto was invented for. Crypto didn't get invented to be regulated, and I don't know, I guess, and we should be careful what we do with that, because that's the power of DeFi lies in that.
Can I add something to what you said? Yeah, and sure. Also to build on the first part of why Gibraltar. In terms of being progressively forward-thinking and be able to talk to the regulators here, we see what happened in the United States, where Coinbase was going to release a lending product on a stablecoin, and the SEC just, A, threatened to sue them, and B, flat out refused to meet them. So how are we supposed to have any innovation if it's basically hey, we built this, and you're going to jail if you think about releasing it? So if it's better to just have these protocols that essentially fall outside the scope of regulation for now, regulation will come at some time, it's best to sort of build and ask questions later, and then, have a governance model that allows for the evolution and the adaptability of a protocol.
For me as a lawyer, I have to, obviously, I'm protecting you guys, right? I'm there to be able to, to look at the law, interpret it, look at what the regulations say, and then give you my views on whether or not you sort of have to comply with certain things or not, whether or not you fall within the scope of certain regulatory framework or not. But obviously, with DeFi, it's very different. It's very difficult to sort of to fit that sort of business model or business operation within the regulatory frameworks that we're used to seeing in financial services. Because things like, for example, AML and KYC, right, safeguarding of customer assets, if this is sort of operated autonomously on a protocol, how can you satisfy the regulators that you are safeguarding customer assets? All you can do is basically say, because you can only go as far as a certain point, and we were talking about this morning. So I guess that's where the difficult. Where do you see what do you see as the big challenges there for decentralized finance? Because regulators are not going to go away.
They're not going to go away, but I think it's going to. They need to adjust their laws to realize that they can't inhibit innovation anymore. From that previous conversation earlier today, I mean, when cars came around, they didn't have laws for how cars would be different than horses on roads, and they had to eventually catch up to these laws. And when it comes to KYC, AML, everybody loves to talk about it. Everybody loves to deal with it from a custodial standpoint or centralized standpoint. But does anyone here actually know the success rate of KYC and AML? Anyone? There's a whole room of fintech and DeFi and regulation. No one?
There's a guy nodding there. Nigel,
What's the success rate? Not even. It's about 0.01. It's got about a 99.99% failure rate. And yet, our financial institutions are spending over $50 billion a year restricting people from opening bank accounts, transferring money, et cetera, for something that is an outright failure. And if you want to talk about terrorism financing, governments consistently just like, I don't know, maybe misplace billions of dollars of weapons in, not to rail my own homeland's foreign policy, but $1 billion into the Taliban's hands of weapons. So is my $1,000 transaction to buy an NFT really something that needs to be regulated?
I think that in terms of the ecosystem, and when you talk about decentralized finance, and Adam, I wish you'd talk because you came up with really good points before, and I'm just feeling that we should be contributing. But realistically, you don't have a mic.
One now.
Okay, but we were talking about it, and I'd like to include Adam because we were talking about DeFi and the responsibility of the community. So you have a project and you have your users. And it's the responsibility of the individual users as well to abide by a code, like the highway code. You're driving a car, the analogy of a car. You know where to park, where you're going to get clamped. So the community should have that self-regulation, maybe start off with that, and imposing it on our users and developers.
We have a speed limit, right? Do we force the car companies to enforce the maximum speed limit on the vehicles?
No, we don't, but we have codes as well, highway codes. So where do you meet? Where do you have it? Do you have it at the point, okay, you're saying the car maker. I'm not saying the developer, I'm saying the community, the user.
Well, I offered to the regulators, and also, I mean, we're obviously planning out an audit, to turn over all of our code before we launch in order for them to realize that what we're building is truly decentralized and from the spirit of actually helping our users. But the whole point of KYC AML is to punish those looking to do good things and not go after those who are actually breaking the law. We don't force car companies to make automatic seatbelts that lock on their drivers or limit the cars to 70 miles an hour.
But they have seatbelts.
They have seatbelts, yes, but we don't force the car company to make the driver comply. And that's the difference, you know, in fintech. They force the companies to make the users comply with the fintech rules. Rather than going after the bad actors, they go after the 99% who are following the rules.
But what do you think about the community having that responsibility to get those bad contenders out of the equation? You know, you have the community there, they dictate the direction of that project, they influence what code you should be developing. Shouldn't that kind of the code of conduct, sorry for being controversial and being too traditionalist, but you know, having that code of conduct?
I think a free market will decide that. If you release a DeFi platform with no audit, why would anyone put their money there? And if they do, they understand the risks that come with that.
Adam, you want to chip in? I can see you're dying to get in there.
Yeah. As Patricia said, we were having a conversation a bit about this outside, and I think, you know, when we talk about DeFi and regulation, it on the surface, it doesn't really make any sense. I mean, like, how do you regulate a decentralized protocol? And
that was actually going to be my next question.
So yeah.
We actually regulate this.
So what we were discussing was like a community responsibility of basically laying out, almost like we discuss here in Gibraltar, obviously the 9 principles. It's a sort of like a best practice that the community could sort of outline. That there's not really a hard, rigid regulation, because I mean, how would, say for example, the GFSE, how would they enforce such a regulation, right? But is there a way, you know, perhaps, especially here locally in Gibraltar, we've got some of the best minds in Europe across the space operating in many different elements of the engine of crypto, and I think there is kind of a community responsibility to outline some kind of basic fundamentals which perhaps the regulator could be forward-thinking on leading, but maybe not to the point where the regulator wants to over-police it. Because I definitely agree with what you said. Like, for example, does it need to be regulated for me to spend $1,000 on NFT? Probably not. But the actual mechanisms of how I spend that $1,000 of say, ETH on an NFT, is there perhaps a community responsibility to allow sort of frameworks to exist which are not, say, hard rules like perhaps the existing regulation we have, but sort of a best practice that if you are going to do this, these are the sort of things we do. And I think it would be very good, I think very progressive and forward-thinking for, say, a regulator that has had a success like with the DLT license here in JIB to, say, begin that process. How that would look, I'm sure there's like 100 different answers to that equation. And is it even possible? I think, to hard regulate DeFi, I think it would be a nightmare and a challenge that just wouldn't really ever take place. But I think for the community, we have like a responsibility, I think we have a responsibility that, platforms that are developing, and there is several protocols, which have been perhaps hacked in the past and things like this. Is there perhaps the regulators would say open a roundtable discussions where they bring in the best minds in DeFi, guys like yourselves who, perhaps not say anti-regulation, but argue that it's kind of like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. How is the best way that the community can sort of foster that growth for the space so that people aren't just sort of left to the wild, wild west? I'm not like a super pro-regulatory framework kind of guy. I mean, I believe it exists for a purpose. And I think, as we were talking about outside, Patricia, is that we need to take all of what's good about regulation. Not perhaps the red tape and the bureaucracy, because they don't apply due to the native protocols we're discussing. But there is some of these sort of like best case things that we can do to, I think as an industry, to enable innovation without sort of trying to make it a nightmare to operate, and or is it even possible to do it? So.
And Adam, the key point here is having those roundtable discussions with the regulator and the community that we have here, because if we can come up with something that is palatable to the community, not stifle innovation, because that's not the point at all. And your point about having an atrocious rate of terrorist funding and crypto being a focus for a lot of things that quite frankly they should be looking, sorry banks, but deflecting at banks. I can name a few, but I won't. But it's that one of the things that we need to achieve is those policymakers, those decision makers, the regulators, educate them, try and understand what we could build around smartly and innovatively at the end of the day.
Just before you come in, Alex, I think that's a very, very key point, is that I think we need to educate the regulators. I think it's blindsided for us as a community, and I think as crypto as a community, we think it's super easy to understand. But the regulators, they have a certain mindset that I think it's our duty to have those roundtable discussions and perhaps suggest ways that it could work. Especially here in Gibraltar, I definitely believe those discussions could take place and would be successful, and it wouldn't end up with some sort of, I would say, failure, really, because I think for a regulator to try and regulate DeFi without the assistance of the community, it's just never going to happen. I think we need to educate them and help them out.
I'm not a regulator. But I want to take the regulator's side here. I think one of the things they want to achieve, I like to think it's one of the things they want to achieve, when things go wrong, who do they go to? I can accept that maybe you can't regulate a decentralized protocol, but you can regulate humans. And the only thing administering a smart contract are humans. And, it's as simple as that, I think. And
I think the term regulating humans scares the ever-living shit out of me.
Well, we're already regulated. We have passport photos,
That is very different than regulating. Maybe okay. So I'm just I'm nitpicking on the choice of words, but that is.
Yeah, I'm a bit direct.
I mean, it sounds a bit like like the Communist Party in China of hey, you can only have 2 kids. By the way, if you have one gender, you gotta like.
No, I think Gibraltar is a good jurisdiction to have these sort of discussions around the table with the regulators, as has happened over the years on the DLT regulations that exist today. And as part of, I also have a different cap on, co-chair the Gibraltar Association for New Technologies, and Stephen will know because he's part of the working group that is looking at, how can decentralized finance, or how can dApps operate within sort of a safer environment, if you like, or within an environment, maybe not safer is the wrong choice of words, but within an environment that the regulators can be comfortable with, and that is something that we're working on with Gant, and actually it'd be good to have all of your input because Alex, Stephen, and the rest of you, just pointing you guys out because obviously you are more involved in the DeFi space. It's great to have your input and sort of your ideas bandied about as to how can we get to a point where the regulators can get comfortable with this sort of activity taking place here in Gibraltar and not having to basically say, no, I'm sorry, go to St. Vincent's or go to anywhere else,
Anthony, for what you said, and Adam, you kind of went on, there's like 100 ways to, let's say, regulate or put a framework on these things. The thing about DeFi is that it's not just 100 ways. It's 100 variables where each variable affects the next variable. So it's, as you multiply across the board, it's a bit outrageous in terms of, in a good way, of how many different outputs you can have. On how to regulate DeFi, I think we need to give it a regulatory sandbox where the regulator sits down on a case-by-case basis and speaks to the team and goes through the light papers and white papers or business plans, and even has a code review team in-house, a government code review team, or outsource it to EY. It doesn't matter to me. But someone that can come in and say, you know what, there is no backdoor to have a rug pull. There is no, just because you're regulated in centralized exchanges or investment funds doesn't mean you can't disappear with the money. I mean, you send Bitcoin to another wallet address and you just piss off to another country. That doesn't mean that the code is being audited. So we have to give it this framework where we can sit down. This is why, again, back to why Gibraltar and how do we do this? Because, let's say the established countries, Gibraltar is a little bit, it's small here, which is lovely. And it's like a jet ski. A jet ski is really easy to turn around. The European Union and the SEC, the United States, is like an aircraft carrier. And if you try and turn an aircraft carrier around, it'll take about, 7 hours. So that's why Gibraltar, to answer that original question. And also, how do we regulate DeFi? Is that we take it on a case-by-case basis and foster the innovation and make sure that on a human-to-human level, the regulator and the protocols, or the team behind the protocols, are I guess, with the right heart in mind. Exactly.
I don't think we have much time left, but I'd like to give the chance to the audience to ask any questions. If anybody has any questions for the panelists or for me. Somebody at the back there? Malcolm.
And Malcolm, I hear you, because exactly, it's all about consumer protection and adoption. And I think I made the point with Bitso. If we hadn't been regulated, maybe we wouldn't have 3 million users, because you need to give that assurance that to our users in safeguarding assets. I know that you're going to have a go.
I use some centralized platforms, don't worry.
No, it's okay. But in terms of consumers, that is adoption. If you safeguard like ensuring that they don't lose their assets through the DeFi system, you will get more adoption naturally. And we are trying to, for example, the DeFi space, it's about lowering barriers to people that can't get bank accounts in the US, can't get bank accounts in LATAM. So effectively, we'd hope that the DeFi, the space, the ecosystem wants to safeguard. Until you don't safeguard, there can't be mass adoption, in my humble opinion.
Can I just add something to this, especially focusing on what Malcolm said, which was talking about consumer protection. Patricia's got on to say it is all about consumer protection and adoption. I'd like to challenge that. What if it isn't all about consumer protection and adoption? I mean, I don't think the reason why Bitcoin was created and the reason why most people are building DeFi projects is for that reason, you know. And I think, I don't know, I think there's, at the heart of crypto and DeFi, there's something bigger than that, you know. Maybe it touches upon everything that Alex mentioned, and that's something more to do with the revolution than that adoption and consumer interest. I know a lot of people that participate in DeFi. I ask people because I'm interested if it's just me, but everybody or most people that I ask are not really interested in consumer protection. And if that's a concern that we have in this room, why don't we make it a consumer choice on whether they want to be protected or not? And that could be something as straightforward as including them in the T's and C's.
I love that question, actually, because I think the assumption is in the wrong place. You're assuming, and I'm assuming that you're assuming, so forgive me, but you're assuming that the consumer needs protection from, maybe not you personally, but the idea of consumer protection. I see you nodding there. I'm responsive. The consumer needs protection from institutions and banks and EMIs and all that. And you're right. Back in the day, a lot of these regulations came into play because the consumer did need protection. People were being fleeced left, right, and center. We've gotten to the 180 degrees on the other side, where now the consumer, DeFi exists because the consumer needs protection from regulation and institutions. It's the complete other way of looking at things. If you jump down that rabbit hole and say to yourself, I went to the bank it was 6 months ago now, but I went to the bank and pulled out a considerable amount of money because I was going to speak at a conference in Dubai. And they asked me, why do you need this money? And I was just shocked, and I was like, well, it's mine. Why do I have to justify this to you? And consumers need protection from the institutions at this stage. And so do we give them the right to be sovereign individuals and have control over their own finances? Do I have any protection from the United States government printing double the amount of supply of money in the last year and a half? 40% before this new infrastructure bill of 3.5 trillion. That's a lot of zeros for, for those of you out there. 40% of the money supply that is currently in circulation today was printed since COVID started. The dollar has lost virtually 50% of its value just on simple paper terms that we haven't seen rise in inflation. And about 5 hours ago, the European Central Bank said, inflation might be here to last. It's going to go longer. First, it was transitory by the United States government, and then now it's here to last. So on that note, since 2008, 70% of the money in this world has been printed. So if the consumers need protection, it's from the institutions. It's from the man, so to say. It's from the governments and bad fiscal policy. We saw a separation of church and state quite a long time ago now. I mean, the idea of crypto Jews in terms of converting and practicing religion underneath has led way to what I like to kind of, we were joking about this last night actually, a new wave of crypto people in terms of taking their sovereignty back into account. And I think we need to see a separation, a partial at least separation of money and state.
Thanks. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for any further questions, but these guys will all be around later and tonight as well, hopefully. So if you have any other questions for them, please feel free to walk up to them later.